I will never forget the day a random photo on social media destroyed my entire life. That was when I discovered what my wife had been hiding for 14 years. A shock beyond words. I was sitting at home, scrolling through my newsfeed, distracting myself from the usual routine, when a photo flashed across the screen. My wife standing beside a boy of about 14 at a school exhibition. Everything in that frame screamed that this wasn't some random acquaintance, but a child whose existence I knew absolutely nothing about. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a coincidence, Photoshop, some cruel prank. But the longer I stared, the clearer the truth became, the posture, the gesture, her gaze. I recognized her down to the smallest detail, and the boy looked so much like her that no doubt remained. I remembered all those Fridays over the past 14 years when she would disappear for the entire day. Her excuses had always seemed normal. Spa treatments, yoga, gym workouts, dance classes with friends, various workshops or women's gatherings, sometimes just shopping with girlfriends. I believed these explanations because we were a young family back then, and I would fly away for 6-month business trips to Alaska in the early years of our marriage. I thought it was normal that she wanted personal space, that she was relaxing and having fun. But now all of it seemed like a mask, a false veil hiding a life I knew nothing about. She had become pregnant during one of my first long business trips, and she had planned to leave because the man she was seeing at the time offered stability and a life I could only dream of from far away. But at the last moment, she changed her mind because she loved me, and it was precisely this love that forced her to maintain the appearance of an ordinary life. I stood in the apartment, unable to gather my thoughts because my brain stubbornly refused to accept this information, while my heart screamed that it was all true. I began recalling her Friday excuses, which I had accepted as mundane. Stories about new spa massages, yoga and Pilates classes, dancing, long shopping trips and visits to cosmetologists, meetings with girlfriends where she would recharge her batteries. And suddenly, all of it began to look like a carefully planned web of lies, concealing a secret that had overturned my life. I followed her on one of those Fridays, trying to understand something, anything, and I saw with my own eyes what finally broke me. She calmly entered the house where this boy lived with his father. Her presence there didn't seem secretive. She wasn't afraid of being seen. For her, this was a normal part of life. But for me, this discovery destroyed everything. Our marriage, trust, family, my sense of self as a husband and father. In that moment, I realized my entire life up to that point had been an illusion. Our daughters, our home, our years together. Everything was built on a secret I never suspected. For the first time, I felt that the past could not be undone, that no explanations or conversations could fix the fact that my life would never be the same, that any decision I made from now on would forever be colored by this pain, this betrayal that now hung over my life like an impenetrable stone, that from now on, everything that had seemed safe and real had turned out to be a lie. The confrontation. After discovering her secret through that photograph, I realized I could no longer just sit and wait, trying to rationalize or deny reality. The moment came when I decided to act. One Friday, I pretended to be sick. I stayed home from the morning so she wouldn't suspect anything. When she prepared to leave, I saw her light smile, heard the familiar words, "I'm off to Pilates." Looking into her eyes, I tried to convince myself this was just routine. But inside, everything was burning, and I knew I had to see the truth with my own eyes. I followed her, staying in the shadows, feeling my heart constrict with each step, sensing catastrophe approaching. And there she was, my wife, turning not toward the gym but toward that familiar house where the boy lived with his father. I stood behind the crowd of people, watching them greet each other, watching her embrace the man, then bend down to the boy. I saw her kiss him on the forehead. Everything happened so naturally, so calmly, as if this were her real home, her real life. Every gesture tore me apart from the inside. When she went inside, I approached the window and saw even more. They sat together at the table. She helped set out food. Then they laughed, smiled at each other, exchanged light jokes. She cared for the boy as if he were her son, and the man beside her partner. I stood outside, paralyzed, watching this scene destroy everything I had ever considered my life. I saw how she went about domestic routines, how easily and calmly she lived here, as if this were a normal part of her life. But for me, it was a catastrophic blow. All those Fridays when she talked about spa treatments, the gym, dancing, shopping trips, every single one was a lie. A mask she wore to preserve appearances, for me and our family, and simultaneously for herself. Inside me grew anger, jealousy, shame, and emptiness. The desire to unravel everything and understand why and how this happened transformed into an almost physical pain. I couldn't leave, couldn't tear myself away, because every movement, every glance, every smile, every touch she gave the boy was a blow to my trust, my self-respect, my understanding of life. And I realized that from now on, every Friday would be torture, that no words or explanations could restore trust, that my reality was destroyed, that I had found myself at the epicenter of someone else's life running parallel to mine, that no mask of calm could return my former feelings. For the first time, I felt emotional rock bottom. The complete sense that the past I had built with her had never been real, that I had been living in a theater of lies, and now I was watching the scene of betrayal with my own eyes. And this image would never disappear, leaving only pain, anger, and a feeling of complete powerlessness. The truth revealed, after seeing her in that house with the boy, every gesture, every smile, every touch tearing me apart from within, I realized I couldn't piece together the whole picture alone. I had to know what happened back then, when I first flew away on that long business trip to Alaska, when she hid her pregnancy and, as I now understood, was on the verge of despair. I decided to drive to her mother's house in the neighboring state to get answers. Though everything inside me burned with pain and rage, I still clung to the illusion that perhaps I could preserve what remained of our family, if the truth became known. Her mother met me with a tense smile, restrained fear, and guilt all at once. When I began asking about what happened in the first months of our marriage, about the strange Fridays and disappearances, she took a deep breath and started to tell the story. She explained that immediately after the birth, she took the child from her daughter because I was supposed to return from my business trip in a week, and her daughter needed to recover, physically and psychologically. As she said, she was having a hormonal imbalance, feeling weak and sick, unable to cope with this, and we decided this would be safer for everyone. For the first 2 years, the boy lived with the grandmother, while her daughter visited him once a week to maintain contact, to see her son, and gradually adjust to her new role as a mother, still hiding everything from me. My head spun as she detailed how they decided every single detail together, how the child gradually became part of their lives, while I, husband, father of 2 daughters, had no idea what was happening. Every fact landed like a blow. My wife had hidden her pregnancy. Her mother helped maintain this secret, all to avoid destroying my marriage, while simultaneously deciding what to do with the child until there might be an opportunity to explain the truth. Her mother described how her daughter gradually realized this couldn't continue, that the secret would eventually surface, and that the child needed to be brought to our home and integrated into family life, because otherwise it would threaten everything we had built. At that moment, I recalled all those Fridays when she talked about spa treatments, the gym, Pilates, walks with girlfriends. And now I saw this was a carefully constructed mask, maintaining the illusion of ordinary life while hiding the truth. I listened, simultaneously feeling a mixture of pain, anger, humiliation, and strange relief. Finally, I understood the whole scheme. Finally, I knew why she disappeared, why her behavior had seemed strange, how these 14 years of secrets had unfolded. But the truth was painful. I understood that trust was destroyed, that any illusion of our former life was gone, that the past could not be undone, and that now everything depended only on me, my decisions, and how I would build a new life for myself and our daughters. For the first time, I felt an internal transformation. I stopped being a blind witness, a victim of circumstances and other people's secrets. I had gained the key to understanding the whole picture, to clarity. And though the pain and sense of betrayal remained, I began to see that I could act consciously, with strength rather than despair. That the truth, however sharp, gave me control over my own life. The final confrontation. I remembered everything her mother had told me and knew there was no point in pretending nothing had happened. I gathered a resolve I barely admitted to myself and drove to the house where this man lived with her son. I entered, cold and calm, but inside me churned rage, pain, and betrayal that I had held throughout the drive to avoid exploding prematurely. I told him I knew everything, about the child, about the first 2 years spent with his mother, about how she had hidden her pregnancy, about how she traveled once a week to the neighboring state to see her son, about how they, with him and her mother, had constructed a false life while I believed in the illusion of our marriage. At first, he didn't believe me, tried to smooth things over, but I insisted. I asked him to call her and have her come over, pretending it was something trivial, supposedly needing to discuss something. And a few minutes later, the door opened, and she appeared before me and this house where her secret had lived for so many years. Her smile froze on her face, but her eyes betrayed tension, fear, and confusion. In that moment, all the truth I had learned from her mother crashed down on her like an avalanche. She understood that hiding was no longer possible. I spoke to her directly, calmly, but with iron strength. I know everything. I was at your mother's. I know about the son, about the first 2 years, about every Friday when you talked about spa treatments, the gym, Pilates, about everything you tried to hide. It's all over. She stood there, speechless, her eyes filling with tears, her voice breaking. She tried to justify herself, to say something about fear, love, care. But every sound seemed weak, empty, because I had already seen the whole picture. Inside me was a mixture of rage, bitterness, shame, humiliation, and determination. I was no longer blind, no longer a victim of circumstances. Now everything depended on me, my choice, how I would act to protect myself and our daughters. I felt anger transforming into action. I said that now she would no longer control our life with secrets, that I would make decisions myself, that trust was destroyed, and this was all her responsibility. She began to cry, a nervous breakdown nearly immediate. But for me, this wasn't satisfaction or revenge. It was liberation. I had finally become master of my own life, finally stopped being blind and deceived. Finally, I could act. At that moment, I began acting decisively. Conversations, life reassessment, divorce planning, caring for our daughters to keep them safe, to help them understand something in this chaos. Simultaneously, I was aware of my wife breaking down, her nervous crisis, her fear and tears, the consequences of the secret she had harbored for so many years. I could no longer remain in illusion, could no longer close my eyes to the fact that our life was built on lies. Everything accelerated. Lawyers, custody questions, nervous breakdown, emotional outbursts, revealing the whole truth to everyone involved. And inside me, a strange sense of relief. The truth was on the surface, nothing more to hide. And for the first time in all these years, I felt strength. The strength to act, to protect, to control. Though the pain was unbearable, anger burned within me, and it was precisely this anger that gave me the clarity I had lacked all these years. Clarity that now my life, though destroyed in its familiar form, could be rebuilt in a new, honest, if painful, reality. Aftermath. After everything that happened, after the truth came out, after the loud divorce, my wife's nervous breakdown, visits to lawyers, and the painful restructuring of our family, I was left alone with reality itself. Our 2 daughters stayed with me. Their presence became simultaneously salvation and a reminder of what I had lost. Trust that could never be restored, the woman with whom I had built a life, and the child I had discovered too late. Life fell into routine, but the familiar routine was different now. Every day reminded me of betrayal, of lies, of those 14 years when I lived in illusion. Sometimes I thought I could forget, could restore the familiar rhythm, but just catching a glimpse of a photo on social media or hearing about him from mutual acquaintances, and everything would return, as if the wound would never heal. I saw her periodic attempts to recover, her treatment at a clinic after the nervous breakdown, her fear, her guilt, her tears, and simultaneously understood that I couldn't return to the past, that she would forever remain the person who betrayed me and our family, even if out of fear, out of love, out of what she thought was right. Sometimes I recalled her smiles, her care for our daughters, moments of happiness that had been real, and confronted the contradiction within myself. I am angry, I suffer, I want revenge and justice, but I understand this will return nothing. I see the boy, who now knows me, who has become part of our life differently than a normal family might have been. And this feeling of new but painful balance forces me to hold on, to act, to build days for the girls, for myself, to avoid breaking completely. Sometimes I wonder, could I have done something differently? Could I have seen the truth earlier? Could I have trusted without suspecting everything was a secret? And I understand there is no answer to this question, because life only moves forward, and any choice always involves loss. I am no longer a victim. I control my life. But this power comes at the price of realizing that trust cannot be fully restored, that the love that existed has become a complex mixture of pain and understanding, and that sometimes strong feelings, even love, are capable of destruction when truth is hidden. Sometimes I want to call her, to talk, to try somehow to explain to our daughters what happened, but I understand this would reopen old wounds, and that perhaps the moral dilemma will remain with us forever. Impossible to forgive, impossible to forget, yet life must go on. And so I continue, day after day, with pain and anger, with caution and determination, with love for my daughters and with the understanding that the past cannot be fixed, but the future is mine alone, even if it is now colored by all this pain, betrayal, and truth that I discovered too late.